Sup, y'all, and welcome to Economic Development and Globalization, Part 3. In this video, we're going to look at forces against development and look at this essential question. What barriers exist to development, and how are these obstacles overcome? Now, the United Nations put forth the Millennium Development Goals in 2000. These goals are to 1. Eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. 2. Achieve universal primary education. 3. Promote gender equality and empower women. 4. Reduce child mortality rates. 5. Improve maternal health. 6. Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. 7. Ensure environmental sustainability and develop a global partnership for development. Most of these goals were supposed to be achieved by 2015, and even though progress was made, these goals were not realistically achieved. As such, in 2015, the UN established the Sustainable Development Goals, numbering 17 in total. These goals include objectives toward ending poverty and hunger, improving health and education, making cities more sustainable, combating climate change, and protecting oceans and the land, among others. Conditions in the peripheral states create barriers for people and nations to pull themselves out of poverty and progress into more developed countries. A common adage states that it takes money to make money. However, with low incomes and high young age dependency ratios, poor nations are at a major disadvantage. Other barriers to development in the periphery include unfettered political corruption and instability, widespread disease connected to poor sanitary conditions, as well as high degrees of income inequality. One of the most common ways to measure inequality is through the Gini coefficient, developed by the Italian statistician Corrado Gini back in 1912. It represents income distribution and measures the level of inequality in a population. 0% would signify perfect equality of income, whereas 100% would represent perfect inequality, where one person would have all the wealth. You can see in this map how income inequality between the richest and poorest is greatest in the semi-periphery and especially in the periphery. These states are also notorious for high degrees of gender inequality. The Gender-Related Development Index, or GDI, accounts for the human development impact of existing gender gaps with respect to health, wealth, and education. A lack of access to clinics, decent-paying jobs, and schools keep peripheral states down in terms of human development. However, many states with substantial impoverishment are investing in education to improve the situations. This is the case with cash transfer policies, also known as conditional cash transfers, such as the Bolsa Familia program in Brazil and child support grants in South Africa. Programs like these attempt to reduce poverty by making welfare programs conditional upon the receiver's actions. For instance, sending their children to school and ensuring they receive regular medical checkups. Certainly there are many positives, however, the influx of new students makes it difficult to find enough quality teachers and overall education may suffer. A problem worldwide, but especially in the periphery, is human trafficking, which is the trade of humans for the purpose of forced labor or sexual exploitation. And unfortunately, the vast majority of trafficking involves females. Many are duped into believing they are going to work in the domestic service as a maid, but then find out they have been sold into virtual or actual slavery. During the time of the Cold War, the First World referred to the United States, like-minded Western democratic states, and their allies. The Second World was the Soviet Union, other communist states, and their allies. And the Third World was everyone else, but predominantly the developing world. During the 1970s and 80s, oil prices rose, leading to increased prices of manufactured goods, and during the same time, commodity prices fell. Since most Third World states exported commodities while importing most of their manufactured goods, they increasingly found it near impossible to pay back loans received from core states and financial institutions. This led to the Third World debt crisis, which then led to a series of international agreements in 1989 known as the Washington Consensus. Two non-governmental organizations, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, along with the U.S. Treasury Department, worked out structural adjustment loans, which were given to developing countries under certain conditions. The massive debts owed to core states and MDCs would be reduced or outright canceled as long as they agreed to privatize government-run businesses, reduce tariffs, and open up their economies to foreign trade and foreign direct investment, or FDI for short. Individuals, firms, and governments engage in foreign direct investment either through buying a company in a target country or by expanding operations of an existing business in that country. Most of this money goes to other core countries and the newly industrializing semi-periphery. Although the US is the largest contributor of FDI, it is also one of the largest recipients, as seen in the map. Additionally, you can see that most of the BRICS countries are also toward the top. And if we throw Mexico in there, we can also use the acronym McRibs. Nice. The Washington Consensus is connected with the late 20th century movement toward Neoliberalism, which espouses laissez-faire, which means let do or essentially hands off. This economic philosophy supports the free market of millions and billions of people and contends that too much government intervention stifles development and prosperity. While the results of the Washington Consensus have been arguably very positive, anti-globalists argue that neoliberal policies support core states at the expense of peripheral and semi-peripheral states. Relating to economic theorists, Rostow would support these actions, whereas Wallerstein would oppose them. Recall that the world systems theory would consider this an act of neocolonialism, entrenching core control over peripheral regions by economic, not political, means. In order to attract new industries, many states have established export processing zones, or EPZs, where these areas experience lower taxes, fewer regulations, and a favorable trade network with other countries. A major EPZ has developed in northern Mexico, just south of the US border. Maquiladora districts have allowed manufactured products to be sent to the US free of import duties or taxes. They are an example of a free trade zone, or FTZ, in which they transform imported, duty-free components, or raw materials, into finished industrial products. And due to demand, more than 3/4 of the goods produced are re-exported to the US. Hundreds of FTZs exist around the world, predominantly as industrial parks in LDCs and NICs. In Mexico, this process began in the 1960s, but didn't take off until the 1980s. Today, there are more than 3,000 assembly plants, employing over 1 million workers, and this accounts for around 20% of Mexico's entire labor force. Mexico has been a regional EPZ for decades, especially since the ratifying of NAFTA in 1994. Most maquiladoras are foreign-owned, in many cases by companies in the US. They are located in northern Mexico primarily due to low labor costs, the ease of transportation to the US, with closer access to major US cities. Mexico has also emerged as a global EPZ, in part due to the US shift towards service industries and deindustrialization, as well as trade agreements like NAFTA. Additionally, Mexico has relatively weak environmental standards. They have a relatively stable government, as well as an expanding middle class, and abundant cheap labor. All of this has also coincided with the emergence of the new international division of labor and the rise of MNCs. China possesses a similar but more internationally influential situation through their special economic zones, or SEZs, which are essentially synonymous with EPZs. First established in 1980, their goals are effectively the same. Most products are exported to foreign markets. The SEZs are also designed to attract foreign investment and technology, and to increase productivity through cheap labor, tax incentives, and the building of improved infrastructure such as ports. The SEZs also show China as a mixed economy, which means the government, while still communist, allows for some capitalist ventures. For instance, firms in these regions can largely hire and fire employees as they see fit, and can work for profit. While the SEZs have benefited China in the aggregate, development has not been uniform. Many coastal cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou have benefited greatly, but have, in a sense, adversely affected other regions along the interior who have been left to the economic backwaters, failing to gain from the overall national economic development. What occurs is known as the Backwash Effect, where economic growth in one area adversely affects the prosperity of another. Wealth and labor move from poorer peripheral areas to more central regions of economic growth, and the industrial production of wealthy regions may undercut the industrial output of the poorer regions. The draining of wealth and labor together with industrial decline is the backwash or polarization effect, and is a feature of core periphery relationships. In peripheral states, development can occur through the intensification of primary activities. Agriculture in these regions typically focuses on personal consumption for the local market or cash crops for international markets. but which are often produced through large agricultural conglomerates. Impoverished farmers can ill afford fertilizers and better machinery. Education levels are often too low to achieve widespread conservation efforts, and soil erosion is commonplace. Desertification is a natural phenomenon but can also be affected by humans destroying vegetation and eroding soils through overuse of lands for livestock grazing or crop production. Peripheral states may also develop through the intensification of secondary activities. However, industrial production also leads to increased air, land, and groundwater pollution. With lax environmental standards, the long-term benefits of development can be drastically hindered through human activities and short-sighted decision-making.
That is correct.